The date is February the 18th, 2000.
I'm Gerald Lyda Sr. I was born in Burnett County, Texas, about 4 miles east of Marble Falls, January the 12th, 1923. I guess I'd always been interested in agriculture and livestock, and I became president of the 4-H club, a big 4-H club, about 6 members. The only reason I got to be president was anybody else wouldn't take the job. I had to take it. I didn't know what my responsibility was, but it sounded important, so I accepted that job in Burnett County, living on a 110-acre farm at that time, which the family began in 1929. We had the crash. Cattle went from $50 down to $10 a head, and we went broke. In 1935, the sheriff, who was a good friend of our family, waited till after Christmas, said, "I've got to foreclose on you." So I had these papers nearly a year, but said, "I'm not going to foreclose on you till after Christmas." So he come out, and my mother died the year before, and we had 7 kids, and my dad, 7 kids to make a living, and they foreclosed on the place, and I drove about 20 head of cattle afoot, me and my brother did, away from that place. That's all the property we had left in the world. I was 10 years old. I drove those cattle away when I was 11 years old. At 12 years old, our family had circumstances built it up to where we had to separate. We had to split up. So I got a job for a place to sleep and something to eat. I worked for them for about 2 years. And then I broke out. They got to want to adopt me, and I didn't want to be adopted by somebody else. So I don't want to misrepresent things. These people that I went to live with, they didn't have any children. I watered the cattle, drew the water out with a rope, watered the cattle and the sheep and goats. I broke their horses, but they wanted some children, and they got telling me that they was going to educate me and make a success out of me. And I never didn't think I deserved much success, so I kind of shied away from that because I had dreams of owning my own outfit somewhere. If it wasn't but 10 acres, I wanted to own something, and I'm very much private-oriented because I wanted to have something of my own, because I had this mania that hooked up in my head after the foreclosure that I just thought I deserved more in the world if I'd try hard enough than to just do without. I broke away from this family, and 2 of my younger brothers still hadn't finished school, and we borrowed a house from some people that wasn't using it in Burnett, Texas. We borrowed a house. Those people were nice to us. They weren't using their house, so we stayed in that house, washed our own clothes, ironed our own clothes. And my dad sent money to buy groceries, and 2 of my brothers joined the Navy. Another got a scholarship to Abilene Christian College, became a football coach, and I drifted off into the construction and cowboy world, you know. I got 2 of my younger brothers, and we finished high school. Then I went out in the construction world. That's the only job I could find, and then worked on ranches in the wintertime, construction in the summer. In the construction world, you needed a pretty weak brain to get into it. You know, it's a fast-moving, dangerous game. A lot of people say a little chance in it, but I always called it a calculated risk rather than the gambling. You know, I never did like the word gambling. Then after I got married, I had to get serious about this thing, you know. And eventually, the only way I could ever get enough money to start investing in ranches was stay in the construction business, because the ranches only paid me $90 a month. And I went to work for Farnsworth and Chambers, the company out of Houston, who did work all across the nation. And I found it interesting. People were good to me, and everybody I worked for paid me more than I was worth every day I worked for them. And they took a special interest in trying to teach me about the business, even though I didn't have a college education. I'd see them hiring college graduates over here and college graduates over here, and I wondered why they'd put up with me, but they were so good to me. I call that the learning process, you know. And I started out in common labor in 1941. I wouldn't trade the 13 years I worked for those people for anybody's college degree. So we was on a big old hospital job about 1946 or 7. And you know, construction people are kind of rambunctious, and they got in a big argument, management did, on the job about they had a field superintendent that was drinking a little too much whiskey and staying out too late at night, and he got some of the concrete little off, and so they fired him. They got a big powwow going there, and this guy they fired had been with the company longer than these younger guys that fired him. And he says, "You know, I can work for Mr. Farnsworth anywhere I want to." Said, "You can fire me, do whatever you want to, but said, if I leave this job, the man's going to take my place as Gerald Lyda." So I'd been working for him only two years. So he dumped this $10 million hospital job on me to do the field work and construct the thing. And And if I'd have been there, I'd have fainted when they was discussing my name. But they come out and told me what the verdict was. They agreed if Jay could leave, that they would give me an opportunity. They threw that at me, and I couldn't believe it. I was 23. I don't misunderstand me. They had a construction manager in the office, but I had the field outside to build this multi-million-dollar hospital. And I almost blanked out when he hit me with that. But I thought, that's a hell of an opportunity. I said, I haven't got anything to lose, and I said, if you people give me a little support in the main office, I said, I believe I can build this thing. And they took me on. I had a man out of the main office in Houston who believed in me also, and he backed him up on putting me out there, and we just built the devil out of that thing and got it built. And I took those plans home. It's about like reading the funny papers. I didn't know much about them, but I studied them night and day till it began to make a picture in my mind. And with the help of a good staff of people, one guy in the office said, no, I'm not going to help you. You took the job. You do it just to go build it. That's the best thing he ever told me, because I studied that much harder then. We built that job, and I worked for those people 13 years, and I did millions and millions of dollars worth of work for them. This company had hired me, fired the man, and put me on this job, and I appreciated that so much that I wasn't going to let them down. And more of those people in that big company, they were nationwide, and they treated me so nice and respected my judgment. When we did a big job, they'd call me in to look at the numbers and work with them. Then I had to go build it. And I came here to build Lacton Hospital out here at Veterans Hospital. And that was the biggest architectural concrete job that ever been built in San Antonio. I never had built one, but I knew I could do it. So we come in here and did that. And the head of the company got killed in a hunting accident, which is a little gibberish to me. I didn't understand it. And I went to his funeral, and as we walked across the churchyard in Houston, one of the vice presidents said, I said, sure did hate to lose Mr. Chambers. And he said, yeah, but said, we're $4.5 million better off. And that just tore me apart, One of the vice presidents say that. And right there, I made my decision that, I'm going to find me another place to work. And there's a power struggle took over after that between the people, and I could feel it coming on. So I was building right down behind the Tower of Americas here in San Antonio, the high rise about behind that. And I finished that job for them. I had the good fortune of developing some good friends, especially a rancher by the name of Steinmetz Dara in Marble Falls, who thought there wasn't anything I couldn't do if he told me to do it when I was working for him on his ranch. And I visited with him, and he told me how to handle money and how to use credits, so you can do a lot better. Said a good credit's worth twice that much cash. He says, if you take it and use it right, tell the truth, pay your bills, keep that credit alive. And when you're buying land, or you need to get enough money in it where you're not in a strain, too much of a strain, making it produce the payments for itself, And I told him, I said, I got a wild dream. I want to do this. And he had been telling me, he said, if you can do this for these people, you can do it for yourself. But I said, I haven't got any money. But said, the company's kind of falling apart there since Mr. Chambers died. I want to try to get in the construction business, and I believe I can make it. Said I've been working them 13 years, and they haven't said one unkind word to me, and they're always glad to take the profit. So he said, yes, you can do it. Said, you never told me anything that you could do anything you couldn't do. We're talking about 1960. We sat there on a log watching some of his horses graze, and he's raised quarter horse and ranch there in Burnett County. And I said, I'm going. He said, well, you got me. He said, I'm your friend, and said, I'll give you power of attorney to everything I got. Said, I think you can do it. He made him out. I still got it. Handwritten. At that time, he was worth $230,000 himself. That's all he had. He had his goats and his sheep and his saddles and spurs and everything else on there. So, but you can't imagine how proud it was to have somebody believe in that strong. I had to turn my head, as I'm having to do now. So that was right after Christmas, and I said, well, I'd like to open up first the year. I'd done millions of dollars worth of work here in San Antonio. They knew I could produce it. I didn't have any money. He said, well, I'll show you how to develop a credit. He said, I operate here in Marble Falls. Said, the bank here got a limit of $50,000. That's all they'll lend to anybody but said I'll keep that alive, and said I can probably mooch some more money if we need it. And so I said, well, if you believe in that strong, I'm going to take you up, provided you'll be a half owner in the business. And he said, well, I need to tell you something. Said, shadows are getting a little tall on my life. Said, I don't know whether you know it or not, but I got cancer, and I don't know whether I'm going to make it or not. So that made me feel kind of bad. But he insisted that said, I'll be delighted to be your partner. Said, I'll do it without me being a partner, but if you feel better, he said, I'll be your partner. Mr. Dyer, he's pretty practical man. He didn't propose to be a contractor, but he was level-headed and had lots of common sense. And what I appreciated most of all, he had confidence in me. So he said he would underwrite my bonding and go partners with me. And we formed a partnership in 1960s, Dara and Lyda Incorporated, for general contracting here in San Antonio. After we decided to form the company, he come down on Monday morning. We were going to establish a bank account at one of the banks. So we visited 4 or 5 of the banks here in town, the Frost Bank and NBC and Gross Bank, and seemed like one other one. I'd been running a lot of company money from a company I was working for through the banks, and they kind of knew I might be halfway decent. But the bankers are careful with money, you know. They don't throw any around. So the biggest line of credit we could establish on 2 kind of unknowns like us was $5,000 open line of credit. That's not much, but we went to 5 different banks there, and every one of them would give us $5,000. I guess that was about par for the course, you know. So we walked out of that NBC then. It's gone defunct now since the 80s. It got in trouble. He looked back at that tall building. He says, you know, they're bound to have more money than that. Said, look how tall that building is. Said, it's 22 stories tall. Said, they got a lot more money than that. Said, I tell you what you do. Said, go back in there and open an account on tomorrow. And he said, have you got any money? I said, I got about $1,500 I don't need for my family. I said, I can buy groceries and get by for a while till I get something going. And he said, well, just go in there tomorrow and open an account and borrow some money from them and then pay it back in 3 or 4 days. And said, let's get this thing to go. So I did. He wrote me out a check for $5,000 himself, and I put my $1,500 with it, and I deposited that in the NBC. I borrowed $5,000 from him, paid it back in a week. I didn't need it, but when we were forming this company in January the 1st, 1960, we were in San Antonio.
And what was your first job?
A little pump station, Wedgwood pump station out on the north side of town. It was a $9,000 job. We bid it, assuming it was dirt, but about 6 inches of the dirt, we hit hardest limestone you ever saw, and most of the mechanical stuff had to be buried in the ground, so it was a toughing you up to go through that job with a tight budget and hit rock instead of dirt, which is quite a differential in cost, but we weathered the storm and made a few nickels on it. At the end of that year, Mr. Dyer, he died, and I had the power of attorney to his ranches and everything else, which was a big concern to his wife, and he had 1 son, and I can understand that. And I felt bad about having it with him gone, and I didn't feel comfortable with it. And I asked Ms. Dyer if she'd like to liquidate that and get out of it, and she said she would. I think at the end of that 1 year, we had $40,000 net. Mr. Dyer, I paid him a salary and drew one myself. We had $40,000 net, so I told her that by taking the assets behind the bonding, it would be difficult for me to buy it, but I would be glad to buy it and get her out of it if she'd sell it to me on credit. I said, I'll pay you $5,000 down on it. I'll pay you 10% interest on $15,000 for your half of it. She said, that's fine, and I guess my credit was all right. She took that note to the bank in my hometown up there and sold it for face value, and 2 years later, I paid it all off, you know. And Farnsworth and Chambers gave me a little wooden office. It had 2 rooms. It was an inspector's shack on the job, a high-rise right behind the Tower of Americas. They gave me that, and that was my office. I moved it out here. I paid $800 for the lot I moved in on. I paid $10 down, $10 a month, drilled me a well for water, and I stayed there for 10 years, I guess. We've been real happy in this business for 40 years, right here on this same block. I've never been anywhere but on this same block. We just kept bidding more work and started off with, that was a $10 million job, and then we went to 15, 20, and went up to $100 million size jobs, and being very careful not to bite off more than we could chew. or obligate ourselves in any way to where I would deter the financial backing that my friend and confidant had put into the company.
Of all of the various jobs that you've done over the years, is there one job that sticks out in your mind as being extremely interesting?
Well, they all been interesting, but, like on the Tower of the Americas, I was bidding little small jobs here, there, and yonder, and I knew that job was far bigger than I could bond. But in there come these old friends that I'd worked for, and I'd fooled them, or they had confidence enough in me. And I called up Mr. H.A. Lott, and I said, we got an awful good job coming up here, one that I'd love to build, but as you know, I can't bond to things. And I said, I just wondered if you'd have any interest in doing this. I said, you know how to spell my name, don't you? Said, just write it. And so Mr. Tom Noonan, a local architect here, a very fine person, I'd been doing work for him. The high rise behind the tower down there was his architect on that, and he and Mr. Mormon, Mr. Mark, and so we bid the job, and politics got hot on it, and they almost didn't build it, and then time was nearly up for even thinking about starting it before HemisFair. They wanted a theme building. They finally come around after a bid was about 6 or 8 months old, and wanted to know if we'd still build it. And of course, it had a $1,000 a day penalty on it, and I told them if they'd remove the penalty of my joint venture. We was H.A. Lott and Company out of Houston. One of my old people that I used to work for years ago had confidence in me, and he didn't mind signing the ticket for half of it, so we built it joint venture 50-50. I was doing all the rest of the HemisFair work down there, the Civic Center and the Chamber of Commerce building, dug the river back in there and built the walls. And I had so many jobs going that I was afraid I wouldn't have enough supervision. I tried not to bid the tower, but my joint venture people thought it was a nice job. And I said, well, y'all give me a project manager on it. We'll go ahead and do it. So they did. And a friend of mine, Al Jensen, come up and did the managing of that job. But we furnished most of this labor, manual labor on it. And he did a fine job. And that's something we've always been very careful about, not to commit to more work than we had supervision for. And I think that's one reason we've been able to keep our heads above water and stay in business. And with the help of Mr. Lott and the cooperation of the city and the architects, we got it built. Turned out pretty nice. I understand a lot of the later bidders got burnt on some of the stuff they run out of money on. I think that was HemisFair money that they got hurt on, and mine was with the city. And I got paid for all, maybe $300,000. No, it was about $35,000 is all I lost. I mean, it wasn't paid under contract. I was the only one that had little enough sense to bid all that work, I guess, and be competitive on it. It worked out nice and put us in a different league. And I think it put the city, as the question you asked me was, did it change the city? It made a new world out of it. Yeah, a new world out of it. I think all the people of San Antonio ought to recognize that and be proud of it, because we couldn't stay a small, sleepy town forever,
A lot of people have said that the HemisFair was a real watershed event in San Antonio, that before HemisFair, San Antonio was kind of a pleaky little town, and after HemisFair, it became a big city.
I guess that's a good analogy of it. I was pretty rural in thinking and looks and everything else, but I'd done enough sizable work around here where the architects on the convention center and whatnot gave me an invitation to bid it, and I guess I, as close as anybody else, saw the city really change. The University of Texas Stadium addition was, by virtue of working space and design of it, was probably as risky a job as anybody ever had, It had some real extremely tall architectural concrete and some integrated precast concrete. And people that have ever done any structural concrete integrated with precast, sometimes that gets awful complicated by virtue of the steel design not dovetailing together. So we didn't have about 20 foot of space between Red River Street and the stadium there to work in. And one thing I remember there, we had a hammerhead crane about 170 feet tall, and I had some precast light columns that went on top of the stadium. I still see it every time I go by. The third light post from the south end, we had it on that crane, lifted up there and set it. I was standing on the ground. I heard this crane popping, a little something cracking. I sent 3 men up that 170-foot boom to check the bolt, see what was, and the operator sitting in the top of it up there. And about the time they got up on that thing that had a 160-foot hammerhead on top, and it broke off right at the vertical tower. It snapped. And that column had a 15-ton column right above my head. And it come down, it hit within 15 feet of me. And there's holes in my suit as big as a $50. I wasn't any blood or anything. I figured the fear of what come out through those holes. I don't know. I figured that one out. I kept that coat and suit in my closet till my wife finally threw it away. But the Lord was looking after that day like he has for so many days. I look at that column every time I drive up the 35 to Oklahoma or Dallas. That was a special crane we had made for that, and I was renting that crane for some people. I guess they felt like they had the obligation. I did too, but I didn't have time to argue. I had a time limit on that thing, and I had to get it built. They had a crane the same size coming in from France. It was on the boat down in Houston, so they shipped it up there to me, and I took that one down, put that one up, and got it finished in time. It was nip and tuck though for time.
Were you involved in building the Alamodome?
Oh yeah, we were. That was let in some stages. I think we had about a $60 million contract there for the superstructure and everything. We did all the bleachers and superstructure and everything. We also did the bus deal on this end of it. That's transit people. We just completing the Westin Hotel downtown right now, and parking garage across from it. We've done quite a bit of work down there. I guess as much as anybody in town has done. We like to think that anyway. Makes us feel good again. This business, there's no end to details in this business. You know, there's a story with every job, and we've done 400 or 500 buildings around this area in Texas. So we have done some work out of state, Florida and Nebraska, but we find that we'd rather work for the hometown people, which just works out better for us. And on special occasions, we do things for special clients if they ask us to go out of town, but we don't chase that kind of work. San Antonio is a town that's going to keep growing. I think the areas that money is being spent on and development may change. You know, a few years ago it was office buildings, and they got up in the 80s. Everybody hit high center on those, and everybody, even the banks and everybody else, got extended on those things. They'll kill you. In fact, there's a lot of out-of-town big contractors in the United States coming in here doing those office buildings. A lot of them thought different than what I did. To get a big job, that big tall building, they'd take an interest in that building as their profits. You know, I never did believe that was right, you know, because they're smart maybe. Because if you stay liquid, and I opted just to stay small, build what I could, whatever somebody give me, and put my money in the bank over here. And I always thought there'd be a time that if you didn't get too involved in owning these buildings, it's all right to build them, but don't get too proud and start owning them, because what you do, something happens to that building, you're going to wind up having to pay for it, and all these resources you got to operate on here, somebody's going to want them. So I just stayed liquid as I could, and it turned out that philosophy is about half right, because a lot of big contractors I had high respect for and still have high respect for, they found themselves sitting on the bench, couldn't bat, you know, because they cut off their bonding. They had so much money tied up in these buildings. That's my analogy of it, you know, and I'm still alive, and most of those people are coming back, but they hit a high center that for a while I could buy more work than they could, you know. You always have enough problems in the construction business without dreaming up problems. So I never worry about a problem until it actually gets there. I try to have enough foresight to avoid problems, but as far as anything that from a political or money standpoint for paying for anything, I assume and try to check out the finance on the job before I sign a contract with them. If they don't have enough money, I just don't get into those contracts. But I've been in a few where they had things that come up that they didn't anticipate, and naturally, if they have a certain amount of money appropriated for it and they didn't anticipate it, somebody on their planning team went to sleep on it or something. Problems arose because contractors can't afford to finance jobs for these people. We just barely can build them when you get down to working on 3 or 4% profit. What I always tell my people, 3 or 4% of a man that you're paying $20 an hour for is not much time, but if he loses that time, you're gone. You haven't got anything in it. So it's tight, highly competitive, sensitive area that's got to be highly respected and handled by both the working people on the job and management. You know, it's tight business. One thing they do when clients come in, they remember I've been here 40 years, and when I tell them something, that's the way it is. They don't have to question it or go get somebody to plead their case, see whether they can do business with me or not, and with us or not, and not me. But I've been a hands-on builder. You know, I come up with mashing my finger. See that little blood blitter finger? I wasn't qualified to be an executive, but I guess maybe in a halfway way I've had to become one to exist. And I guess I enjoy it less now than I ever have. But I enjoyed it a whole lot more when I was right out there making it happen in the field. And as you get larger or get spread out more, you got to spend more time in the office. And that's not as funny as, well, if I'd have been a little better trained, it might have been funny, but it hasn't been too funny to me. But my business has been so pleasant and so good, and so people have been so kind to me and helping me along in life that I can't hardly believe it, you know. That don't mean you made a lot of money or anything, but it's just been pleasant, you know. There've been a few little bumps in the road. All these jobs got their individual problems in them to create, and then you got to kill that problem. It's kind of like wait for nothing to happen, you know. So all good things come to an end is my philosophy. Everything can't be good forever, so I think there's going to be lots of spending on the ecology. I don't know what form that'll be in particular, but there's going to be a lot of corrections, cleanup done in the atmosphere and in the earth. That may be some construction there that will carry a business of our type along. Right now, got quite a bit of work going, and we haven't worried too much about getting work, but I know that sooner or later that it will drop off. You'll have to set your thermometer for something else, you know. I'm an antique. I class myself along in the computer age just like I did the people that couldn't read and write 40 years ago. They let me stay around here, I guess, as long as I signed the checks and everything, but I'm not capable of helping them much except the computer age. Even out on the job, we use laser levels where we used to use the old manual levels, and it's a new world in their estimating department. They kick out an estimate now that in a day that used to take 30 days to take off and price up, you know, punch a button and there it is. So it's unbelievable how much it's changed. It's all been exciting and even to the point of being dangerous to me at times. My wife told me this morning at breakfast, said, "You like to live on the edge, don't you?" I guess that's right. You know, I don't know that I had any particular abilities, but I knew that I had to work, you know. Whatever you get in, if you work hard and think smart, I don't know what I'm capable of thinking smart or not, but intelligently and be honest. I think you sure got to be honest. I don't think you can lie or steal and get ahead in life. You may think you are, but you won't. So that's my basic philosophy. Of course, you got to know what you're doing. You got to understand what you're doing, and you got to convince the people you're working for that you understand what you're doing. Above all, be honest and produce a good product. I got a strong belief that I get a lot of help from up above, you know. And if I don't bet a job, I just write it out of my mind. I don't worry about it because I trust in a higher being than myself a whole lot to hang around. And he's been good to her for 77 years. And if he says for some reason I'm not there, I accept that. I shouldn't do it going down the road because and so many times, maybe a little inkling that maybe I'd like to do that. And then so many times I've been thankful that I didn't because something better happens. That's the way it works.